Welcome to Washington Focused. I'm your host, Spencer Pauly, and with me today is the Center Square's Washington State reporter, Carlene Johnson. Carlene, let's talk about three tax bills that received a due-pass recommendation from the House Finance Committee. We have Senate Bills 5794, 5813, and 5814. Now, we're going to talk more in depth about that, but can you just first walk us through the significance of these three tax bills?
Yeah, Democrats, as any of our readers and listeners know, Washington State facing a budget shortfall of anywhere from $10 to $16 billion, depending on who you ask. And Democrats, who are in the wide majority here in both the House and Senate and the Washington legislature, argue the state needs new revenue sources, new taxes to avoid deep cuts to important state services. Now, Governor Bob Ferguson, who just took office this year, he's acknowledged, yes, we may need some more progressive taxes in the state to kind of balance things out. But he, at the outset of session, went to state agencies and said, I want cuts across the board. I don't want to see big, giant tax increases. So there's been this dance kind of throughout this whole long session, with just a few days left here at the end of, okay, how much money do we really need to raise versus savings and efficiencies we can find, kind of the Doge version, right, of what they're doing on the federal level. So with Sunday, the scheduled last day of session, it is coming down to the wire, Spencer. And as of Wednesday morning, I sat in on a media availability with Republican leaders from the House and Senate. And Wednesday marked day 18, where they have not seen a final budget proposal from the Democrats. So they're seeing these individual tax proposals like the three you just referenced, and we're going to talk about, that make up big chunks of the overall budgets. Right. But they're not seeing the actual proposals on the line items. And they tell me this has never happened before. They've never been completely shut out of final budget negotiations for this long and this late in the session.
That doesn't sound very bipartisan. I mean, just hearing this, and this does seem unprecedented. Like, session's about to end on Sunday. So I think, Carlene, I want to ask you here is, with, session nearing its end here coming Sunday, how does this type of timeline influence the legislative process and the quality of the debate around these bills?
That is a really good question, because one of the comments that was made on Wednesday morning in the media avail from Republicans was that even in negotiations that were on the House floor Tuesday night into the early morning hours on Wednesday, there were amendments being offered by Democrats, things they hadn't even seen. Now, as these things work, usually they know what amendments are going to be considered. They have an argument to, go with it or reject it one way or the other before. But they said there were so many twists and turns coming up so late, even on the floor, that they had no idea to expect. And so it is really very difficult for them as the minority, really not having, honestly, any power to stop these things. When they come to final votes. So it was interesting to sit in the hearing on Tuesday and watch three of these bills get pushed through despite all kinds of amendment attempts by Republicans.
Well, let's just dive into these bills real quick, just so listeners can understand what we're talking about here. So let's start with Senate Bill 5794. You said it aims to eliminate obsolete tax preferences. Can you explain what kind of tax incentives are being targeted and why they're being considered outdated?
Right. All kinds of them. So you've got all kinds of businesses or service-oriented business even that receive tax preferences, right? So one of them that's going to go away is interest on real estate loans for a B&O tax deduction. Prescription drug resellers having right now preferential B&O tax rates. Precious metals, like you go and buy, gold and silver. A lot of people been doing that lately with not being so certain about the stock market or even, the solvency of our banking system. Insurance producers, insurance agents, you name it. There are a whole bunch of things that tax preferences that will go away. The argument made over and again by Republicans offering these amendments to, exempt out a few of these things that are going to be, lose their tax preferential status is, wait a minute, that all gets passed on to the consumer. It's not like when the title insurance guy all of a sudden has lost his tax preference status and it costs him a lot more to make those filings with the state when you were a title for a vehicle or a house or whatever. They're going to pass that on to the consumer. That's just how the market works, right? They're not going to swallow that hit. So every one of these, even though these are termed progressive revenue, the Republicans have continued to argue it's really regressive because it's fallen down on the lower and middle income folk who have to then pay more to go in to get their vehicle title transfer. Or all kinds of, even smaller mom and pops raising B&O taxes on some of these smaller businesses, is going to be a big hit. So that was the argument over and over again for why 5794 should at least include some of the amendments offered by the minority.
In those amendments, Carlene, you're talking about preserving exemptions for credit unions, and you said precious metal businesses, right?
Right. That was one of the ones. It was interesting. Representative Rob Chase from Liberty Lake, he offered an amendment to exempt those businesses that deal in precious metals. And he talked about how one of the first jobs he had as like a late teen was to work in one of these places that dealt with precious metals. And he said he learned a ton. He's like, the people that are coming in, these are people that like learned to bury money in their mattress during the Depression. And then they went, okay, maybe the house could burn down, something safer to keep, in the family safe, or in the, safe deposit box in their bank is maybe gold coins or, bars of gold and silver if people can afford those anymore because the value of gold and silver has gone up so much.
Of course.
That was shot down. And one of the Democrats who shot that down, Representative Alex Rommel from the San Juans, basically said, well, does this type of business deserve preferential status over some other business that operates similarly? I think the answer is no. And they kept saying over and over again, Spencer, that it's basically the budget situation, they argue, is an emergency. So exempting any of these businesses from losing tax status isn't fair to the overall good. That was the argument I heard over and over again in that Tuesday hearing.
That's interesting. Yeah, I saw Rommel's quote there. You entered into the story there, and it's just interesting. How do you interpret the tension between fairness and targeted exemptions during this committee discussion?
That's really, really hard to say, right? Because everybody says, the majority you hear over and over again, let the wealthy pay their fair share, right? So you've got several of these tax proposals that are going to be a huge hit to some of our big tech companies, Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks, Boeing, going to take major hits with some of these tax proposals. And as I've heard the minority say over and over again, eventually, these folks, as in Jeff Bezos, they don't have to stick around, whether it's their primary residence here or whether it's moving corporate headquarters or actual, manufacturing out of the state. Boeing already did that, right? Several years ago to South Carolina. Republicans fear that the writing is on the wall with many of these tax proposals. And that's been their argument. So yeah, you can make the argument that, those guys make so much money and many of their employees are so well paid. So, they can afford to pay more. But when those businesses go away, it's the average guy that's, worked there at Boeing and maybe hope to retire there that stands to, see his manufacturing plant closed and lose out. So, it's hard to reconcile that argument in my own mind, just personally, as to, let the wealthy pay their fair share, because it doesn't really work that way. They're the ones that create the jobs in business and have given us this great economy in Washington State, this high tech economy. And, minority argues we're putting that in jeopardy.
I mean, covering Seattle and just seeing like the jumpstart payroll tax and how businesses like Amazon are moving their employees over just to Bellevue. When you have like a progressive tax source at a city level, it can just cause these businesses to just move. But what happens at a state level? Do you see them move their businesses, say, to Idaho or, like you said, South Carolina? So that's definitely part of the argument and part of the debate here. But Carlene, let's talk about some of these other taxes. We have two other ones to talk about. Let's go with Senate Bill 5813. Now, this bill proposes making the capital gains and estate tax more progressive. Can you elaborate on how the proposed changes? I'm looking at that 2.9% surcharge for gains over 1 million. How might that impact Washington's tax structure?
Well, the majority argues that 5813 is necessary because it would increase funding for the Education Legacy Trust account. So, money for schools overall. Sounds good. Who can be opposed to that? But this 2.9% for gains exceeding $1 million, that's going to make capital gains applicable to thousands of additional Washingtonians. And again, it brings up the whole argument of, wealth flight. These folks, many of them, even if they're going to keep a business interest that they have here, they don't have to live here. They don't have to have their assets in the state of Washington. So that again is the argument for folks that were opposed to 5813. But it passed and it's already cleared the Senate. So now after clearing the committee on Tuesday, it just awaits a final vote on the floor of the House, likely to be reconciled with what passed the Senate because there's, some slight differences. And then the other one was Engrossed Substitute Senate Bill 5814. And that one created the most controversy during the hearing because this is going to apply all kinds of additional sales and use taxes to specific services. This is the one where they're going to increase cigarette taxes even more. Yeah. They're going to expand the tobacco tax to non-tobacco items. You've heard them talk about like Zyn. Some people use that if they're trying not to be a smoker anymore, I guess. And so the argument is, we just going to tax all these the same. Whether you're trying to quit or you're just a cigarette smoker, you should be taxed the same.
So, and this bill here got some bipartisan opposition, right? 2 Democrats joined in, Republicans to vote against it. What were they saying? What made this bill particularly contentious?
Yeah, and Sharon Wiley of Vancouver, Democrat, is one of those ones who voted against the bill, as did Larry Springer out of Kirkland. I followed Representative Wiley out of the hearing, and she stopped to chat with someone. So I stood and waited for an opportunity to ask her, why were you a no vote on this? Because Democrats have been going along, step line with every one of these tax proposals. And she said, because, as we referenced earlier, Spencer, some of these these proposals have been thrown in even last minute, where even majority members hadn't seen the full proposal before it's maybe coming up in the hearing, or maybe minutes before they're meeting with, caucus staff and going, okay, wait a minute, they've changed this and they amended this and this is out, this is in. And so she said that she was very concerned that she didn't have enough time to look at the full proposal to give it an up or down vote. And so she voted against it. She did tell me that she was hoping that, before it actually goes to the full floor, that you'll have some more time to look over some of those last minute changes to feel comfortable with giving it, a final vote. But man, Spencer, Sunday's supposed to be last day of the session, 105 days. It feels like I've been here 1,005 days.
You have been there a lot, Carly, and I know you're putting a lot of miles on your car going over to Olympia and whatnot.
Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah. It's a lot. It's just a lot.
And like just the fact that we're nearing the deadline, it feels like a college freshman trying to, cram in a whole entire 800-word essay and say before the deadline, the 9 a.m. the next day, right? Like,
exactly.
This is just, Carly, if I could just, let's wrap this up here. Let me ask you one more question. Okay. So these bills are now headed to the Rules Committee in the final chamber. Yep. So based on your reporting, what challenges or debates do you anticipate as they move forward? I mean, this is coming up here soon with Sunday, so we got a short amount of time here.
Yeah, I think they're going through. I think every one of these proposals is going through. And I think the only hope that Republicans have at this point is that if Governor Ferguson ends up deciding that he'll either line item some of these things. In that case, it's going to be up to really just budget leads and maybe leads and caucus leads to come back in special session, right? It wouldn't require everybody to come back. Not every lawmaker would have to come back, but it would be required. If he ends up taking the red pen to some of the things in the budget, that will be required. The other really important thing to watch out for in so many of these bills, and certainly every one of the budget bills, tax bills, is the fact that they all contain an emergency clause. And I found out on Wednesday morning from one of the Republican budget leads, 183 bills sponsored by the majority this session have included an emergency clause. 183. It's never happened before. It has been used in Republicans contend abused during the session more than any other. And the governor's already, taken out the emergency clause on one of these bills that he has already signed. So now if all these tax measures get to him and he goes, wait a minute, this isn't necessarily an emergency to be implemented immediately upon signature, right? Otherwise it's the 90 days. Republicans say it's not an emergency. They contend you can come up with a budget here without any tax increases at all. So that's going to be another thing to watch. And there's going to be, I guarantee you, a big fight after this session to figure out how to rein in the use of that emergency clause.
Carly, I know you're going to cover all of this too. And, we're almost there. So hang in there. Go back to your, at this point, you better have a bed somewhere set up in the, All right, Carly. Well, we'll keep an eye on this, of course, and I know you'll keep covering. So thank you so much for all your hard work on this in the legislation. So with that, that'll be the end of this episode of Washington Focus. Till then, see you next week.